I wanted to thank Helmut Middendorf that he had the courage and to make a selection and to make a presentation of a series of work. It is definitely not very easy. It's a real retrospective he did with the slideshow. And I must say it is also very difficult for me to enter details. I will just stop on one thing you said at a certain point, which is obvious over the years more and more when we see your work. You said that your work is made out of many layers. And it is something that at the very beginning it was not at all obvious. It was an expressionist, as you said, considered as an expressionistic work and as a very direct work, as an immediate expression of everyday life, of rock and roll culture, of young people, riots, Berlin, things you could read at the papers, etc. Nevertheless, even if for most of the artists of your generation it was like that, I believe that for you it was not only like that. It was from the very beginning a kind of hidden structure that was giving thematics and like the architecture, like the city, like the people, like they were much more than just reportage images.
No, I always refused in the 80s with this simple meaning when critics came and said, okay, this is just bigger German expressionism. That was too simple. It was very colorful, it was expressive, but it was not expressionism. Also, I was not an expressionist who had to express himself, you know. No? I just worked with the material. I reflected on that I said, okay, when I want to make a loud, big painting, what do I have to use? When I want to express what I experience in my life, what do I have to use? And the solution was, okay, we take very bright colors, we take aggressive colors, and then we make it big. But I also said when the 80s were gone, and the 80s were gone for me when the wall came down, because if we then Berlin changed totally. Berlin today is a totally other city than it was in the 70s or 80s. That's not comparable at all. And the paintings from the 80s lived with a backdrop of Berlin, no? And this backdrop vanished. Mm-hmm. So it would not be make any sense then to say, okay, now we just, because it was so successful, we just go on and do this kind of paintings. I was never that way. I always said, okay, no, my interests are really wider, and I don't want to follow just an idea because it is successful, and then we go on and on until it becomes academic. Mm-hmm. No way. And this is a curiosity in review that Athens helped me back to do conceptual work. Mm-hmm. You know, and also the groups I do mm-hmm. are conceptual groups of paintings. And also when I do paintings that are very, very colorful, they are not expressionistic. They are not. The way I use color today is totally different.
Mm-hmm. I'm very happy to hear you come to the second point, which is, let's say, the geographical situation. I believe it's not just geography, and that's the very interesting thing about it. I mean, when you talk about Berlin, you're talking about a very specific historical situation, political, social, and what was extraordinary is when you come to Athens and you look not at the tourist Greece, but in a city ourselves as Athenians, we dare perhaps today to look at Athens like you did already 20 years ago. And I'm very happy to see that this early, late 80s, early 90s paintings of yours are really a big move into art history, because another point which is very important, when you started, I mean, the people around you as wild artists, it was also a refusal of, let's say, any kind of continuity, any knowledge of art history, any let's say, bourgeois culture of academy, of people they knew. And it is not true for you. It is true you are not having a bourgeois relation to the things. But it's not true at all that you don't look, I mean, only just to look at the paintings. You see Hogarth, and you see Goya, and you see Dürer, and you see a lot of reference from the very beginning. And in the very early work, contrary, let's say, to Fetting, who is paraphrasing Van Gogh, you know Van Gogh, and you know when you are quoting Van Gogh, let's say the street with the subway in Berlin and Kreuzberg is a night landscape of Van Gogh in a way. No? It's a kind of straight reference, but it's just one thing, very specific. And when you come to Athens, suddenly you change, you become a kind of Mondrianesque painter, which is extraordinary because of your relation to architecture.
What I said, I did a lot of paintings already in Berlin on architecture,
Yeah.
but my whole art is in the end inspired by the metropolitan background. Now, that was New York, because I had also in New York a studio in the 1980 already, and then in 1985 again. And so, and Berlin as a metropolitan, extremely important, but Athens also as a huge metropolitan area, but with a totally other influence. Now, the influence, I was, in the beginning, I was not interested in doing paintings on people here. No? Why? I was not interested in painting the history. Why? I'm not a Greek. No? And so I reacted on the structure of the city, on this enormously sea of concrete.
Mm-hmm. But in that sense, I would say that historically, if you are in a city like Berlin, in order to find an equivalent of Berlin, you won't come to Athens, definitely not. Athens is not at all a city that looks like Berlin. You could go to Istanbul, for instance, to find a city like Berlin. You'd go to New York.
I was already in Istanbul, because in Kreuzberg there were 50% Turks, you know. You have to see that.
Athens is a very different city. And in that sense, what also attracted me in your work, it was your way to be on a borderline. You were close to certain people. They were moving from Berlin to a totally different context of people of our age at that time in Germany. It was more my group of people, the people in Düsseldorf and Cologne, especially in Düsseldorf. And Düsseldorf was, I would say, Occidental bourgeois city, much more like Athens in a way, much like, with an organized society, with the shops and the rich people and the poor people and the academy and the values and the culture of enlightenment, a kind of Occidental city with also a very tragic memory of history, but not on the level of the architecture, on the level of the society. It was distracted society because of the Nazis, but not the city.
You mean the difference between the Rhineland, Cologne,
yes.
Düsseldorf,
yes.
and the
and
Berlin situation? Yes. Yeah, that's not comparable. It's also a question. In Berlin, you have Protestants, the Protestant background, and in the Rhineland, Cologne and Düsseldorf, you have a Catholic background. And the Catholic background was always very, very picture-friendly. And the Protestantic background is more clean, and that's also the reason why there were never a lot of collectors in Berlin until today. Now the collectors live all in West Germany. Not all, but 80%.